I've lived in London my whole life. I started going out raving when I was like 14 years old. London at that time was really vibrant and was a total mix of people. You'd go out and it was kind of like, really was multicultural and multi-musical. You know, you'd hear electronic records next to hip-hop records, next to electro records, next to rock records. And it wasn't, you know, a kind of eclectic cliche. It really was a genuine kind of expression of people. It was an exciting time. I used to work in a record shop where I lived in Edgware, and I was doing that every Sunday, and I was going to college at the same time as well, and I pretty much knew I wanted to design record covers. And so that was, you know, when I first started doing a diploma in general art and design, that in my head it was always like I knew when I left college I wanted to design record covers because I loved music. And even though I didn't quite know what graphic design was at that early age, I just knew it was something I had a passion to do. I got into designing record covers by going out and by meeting people. So I met Mark Moore at the WAG Club. He had S Express. I literally went up to him and said, I love your music. I want to do a record sleeve for you. Because I'd heard somewhere, maybe I'd read in The Face or I'd read in NME that he had a new record coming out. And I just literally remember taking my portfolio to the WAG and sitting in the booth and opening up and showing him my work. Same with like the Champion stuff. I was going out and just meeting, you know, I was just meeting DJs and loads of people, and I was just a very arrogant kid, confident kid, so I didn't have a problem kind of shouting about what I did. And also at the time, that was the main thing. At that point in time, people designing record sleeves were old, so there was no one of my age actually out there, so it didn't make sense to me why you had 40-year-old guys designing record sleeves that were made by young people for young people. My design company was just me. I didn't have anyone else working for me, but I wanted to have the persona of a bigger company just to give myself a bit more weight. It was called Bite It. And then I set up a British hip-hop label with the same name around the early 90s to put out records from my friends called The Brotherhood. And my label, the Bite It label, took off from there, and I started working with Lewis Parker and a band called The Scientists of Sound, Little Paulie Ryan. I didn't release so many records, but it was really important for me at the time to have a record label, a hip-hop label, which was intelligent and creative, because at the time a lot of hip-hop was quite either really, it was either quite dumb or quite generic, and I wanted to do something which was far more interesting. My first productions were done under the name Underdog, because I really was an underdog. I was this white, middle-class Jewish kid from North London making hip-hop, and I felt like I was an outsider at that point in time. And I started, my first productions were with the Brotherhood for my own label and doing stuff like that, but then I did a remix of The House of Pain, which ended up being a top 10 record. And from that, I got remixes from, did 3 remixes for Massive Attack, did things for U2, The Cure, loads of people. I did like 100 odd remixes in the space of 4 or 5 years, I think, maybe more than that. The golden age of hip hop was kind of over, and people were getting more and more narrow-minded. And as I said, you know, the music I was sampling and interested in was avant-garde music. So I put an end to Bite It, and then after a break I started Output, which gave me an outlet to be a bit more, well, a lot more experimental in many ways. All the artists I worked with were either artists that were rejected from other labels, artists that people weren't really interested in, or artists that just made music that was a little bit more left to centre, and at the time people weren't so interested in hearing. I mean, I was very lucky because I got to work with artists like Fortet very early on. Mike from Sonovac, who's now Mickey Moonlight on Headbanger. Obviously the LCD and the Rapture. So, and these are all artists I worked with from the very beginning, and my passion for music and the music I like is normally quite naive, raw sounding music. So as I say, I was fortunate to work with these artists at the very beginning when they first started their career, and I think when they were probably at their strongest. And I started listening to other kind of, because I was in this zone of listening to really dark avant-garde music. In fact, the more strange the record was, the more I loved it. And it just put me in the wrong place, and I started to go back to music that I loved, that made me happy, albeit that a lot of Compass Point Productions and Grace Jones and Tom Tom Club. And those records were really joyous and simple. And I just made a decision that I really wanted to make a joyous and simple record. And kind of like I wanted to make my own pop record. And also at the time, a lot of artists took themselves way too seriously, so I wanted to have this kind of Giorgio Moroder-esque kind of almost not cheesy, but a kind of a more, I wanted to have a face, because the underdog, I was always in the shadows, and so the Playgroup was really about me coming out as a more kind of like positive, fun artist. That was the idea. We have a situation now when indie labels, when it comes to marketing their records, almost think the same as major labels. They never used to be like that. With Soulwax, I wanted to create something which wasn't immediate, but you'd be able to interact with it. So I created a campaign which was all based around optical effects. So the posters would just look like dots or lines, but then when you move past them, they were kinetic. I developed an effect where the type would come out of the optical effect, not immediately, very, very subtly. And it took a lot of experimentation to get it right, and I had to do it for each format, so for digital, little small things like that, and for big posters. But I convinced the band and I convinced the record company that it was better to do something that people, when they looked at it, first of all, didn't understand what was going on, and then when they walked past it, it kind of interacted with them, and I thought that would have far more of an impact for them to turn around to their mates and say, wow, do you see that poster? Than them just walking past a poster which said, Soulwax, album coming out November the 3rd with a photo of the band, which is what 99.9% of record labels do. With everything I do, attention to detail and continuity is intrinsic. For me, I don't put a line on a piece of paper or an element anywhere without having a reason to be there. Same with music. I just think that if you're going to do something seriously, then you have to really do it seriously, and I treat composition, be that sonically or visually, there are laws and rules to it. I mean, they might not be laws and rules from books, but they're my own rules. And so when it comes to colour, I do a lot of stuff in black and white because I want to convey my message and my message as simply as possible. And to me, the best ideas and the strongest ideas are things that don't work immediately, but they have a directness and they're powerful. Like I said with the Soulwax thing, it wasn't immediate, but it had some kind of power. I grew up in London going to clubs from a very, very early age. So I was like 13, 14, my friends dragging me into clubs. And the first clubs I went to were clubs like the Camden Palace with Colin Faver and Eddie Richards playing. And this is pre-Acid House. And they were playing amazing electro records and hip hop records and industrial records. I went to a club called Astral Flight with a guy called DJ Wolf at the Embassy Club. And he was playing Alien Sex Fiend mixed into Hashim, Alnafish. And that point in time stuck with me forever. And this metal dance compilation for me is probably something I've wanted to do for 20 years. It's confrontational music, this music. It's not easy listening. And that's what interests me about it. Listening to this compilation, listening to all this music, this is literally probably a DJ set I've been playing since I was a kid, all these records. And they all mean a lot to me. I mean, one of the best things about doing a compilation like this is being able to actually have contact with some of the artists that that you used to love. I've had emails with people from like the guy from Hardcorp's Je suis passé record, produced by Martin Rushent. And Martin Rushent was like my hero as a kid. I would never have dreamt that I'd ever speak to this band that I saw on the Tube. And it's sonically so exciting. It's a really exciting time. And I know there's loads of new wave, no wave, post-punk compilations around. But for me, I'm shocked. There's records on this compilation which I can't believe people haven't really put out before, And hopefully, I'd like to think people at the time who were around would think, yeah, these were all a lot of the big tracks from the time. And there'll be a lot of people, I'm sure, who've never heard this music before. When I was a kid or a teenager listening to these records for the first time, I was actually into the producers. I was a real nerd, and for me it was about production more than the artist a lot of the time. And my gods were Arthur Baker, Adrian Sherwood and Martin Rushent. And the Pete Shelley track, Witness a Change on the compilation, that was taken from his, I think the Homo Sapien album. And so it was something that Martin Rushent did around the time of Dare, which is probably not as well known as Dare and the League Unlimited Orchestra album, but his production techniques were incredible. And that Witness a Change track was a big club track. I think it was like, I'm pretty sure Larry Levan played it. It was a big club track all over the world. But I needed to have Martin Rushent music on this compilation, and I have the Pete Shelley track and the Hardcorp's tracks, which are both seminal records for me. A lot of these records are difficult records, and difficult more in the fact that sometimes they were difficult to make. Now music is so easy to make. We get big arguments about whether that's a good or bad thing. Personally, I think that's a bad thing. I think if you have to spend a whole day trying to make a drum sound, like a kick drum, which these people had to do, that's a hell of a lot of work, a hell of a lot of passion to make that sound. And if you put that amount of energy into making a record, it's gonna have power at the end of the day, and it has a different presence than some record that's made in half an hour. A lot of these records have specific memories to me related to each one to a certain club. Like Alien Sex Fiend was a big record played by this guy DJ Wolf at Astral Flight, also going to the Batcave a few times. It's just a crazy record. I mean, people probably, when they hear the track, they have to go online and look at photos of this band. They were just mental. I suppose people would say they're a goth, but they weren't. It was kind of like crazy horror madness. And yet you hear them experimenting with crazy dub techniques, These weren't ignorant people. At the time, a lot of people were so open to music, and not in a really cliched and not in a trendy way. They genuinely are interested in pushing things. A lot of these records are about culture clashes and about America meeting the UK, or meeting Germany. The Leidenack and Amok record is mixed by Mark Kamins. Mark Kamins worked with everyone from ESG and Madonna. This is a period of time when things really, I think clubs were social melting pots they were of huge cultural importance. Quite what cultural importance clubs have now, I don't know, in that beyond just being social and being musical, I don't know how much they go on, but at this point in time, they were everything. It was creative, it was political at the same time. And it's something, it's a time that I miss.